Hey guys, it's Dave Floss here from Mentally Unbalanced and Prometheus Falling Toys. And today, I'm going to talk about the new Snake Eyes movie. So stick around. Hey everyone, Dave Floss here, and today I'm going to talk about the recently released G.I. Joe Origins movie, Snake Eyes. Now, if you are a member of basically any of the G.I. Joe Facebook groups, at least the ones I'm a member of, there has been a lot of talk about basically this movie since the day it was announced. And most of it was not very positive, right? So I'm not so much going to get into all of that in this review. I'm really going to focus just on the core of the movie itself. But if you have been living under a rock for some time now, the big hoopla basically was the casting, right? And if it wasn't casting, it was the liberties, let's say, taken with trying to reinvent or recreate a new origin story for Snake Eyes. And a lot of this comes out of the origin material from the comic books of the 1980s. You know, in the G.I. Joe animated series, there really isn't any true background or history to many of the characters, especially Snake Eyes. He was just there. But the comics, recognizing that this was absolutely a fan favorite character, the Ninja Commando, Black Mask, Can't Talk, Silent Master, generated a lot of origin and background and story content for the original run of the G.I. Joe comics, and even in all of the newer comics that are coming that have come out from Devil's Due or IDW or the other publishers. Snake Eyes, of course, continues to be an absolutely key character that they present. But if you go back to the 80s, right, and you look at how the character was portrayed, as we get into like the early 20s of the original run, or issue 20 to 24, we get a whole beautiful origin story for the Snake Eyes character. And what we see here in this particular image is the origin story of Snake Eyes in Vietnam with Tommy, who would eventually become Storm Shadow, and Stalker, who would eventually become a member of G.I. Joe. And this really, it's actually one of my all-time favorites. So at my age, I had the fortune of reading the comic when I was a kid, when it came out. And I actually love this origin story. It was really excellent. Snake Eyes ultimately rescues Tommy from a firefight to get to a chopper and suffers an injury to his face, which causes him to not only be deeply scarred, but also to lose his ability to talk. And this leads eventually to Snake Eyes going to Tommy's ninja clan. And I'm going to probably butcher the name because I always get it wrong, but the Arashikage clan, which is where he becomes, learns his ninja skills. We get a lot of background history of the Hard Master, the Blind Master, the whole clan, some deception, and ultimately what leads Tommy to go on to his persona of Storm Shadow with Cobra, so on and so forth, and then Snake Eyes going to G.I. Joe. And there's a lot. There's so much more to this story with how Snake Eyes eventually joins G.I. Joe, about him coming home from the war and finding out that his family's been killed. There's a lot of meat to this character, which is why he becomes, you know, more than just being a cool character, which of course he was. He's got a deep background, deep backstory that they developed, and it's really, really excellent. Now, you jump ahead several issues, and then we get to actually see, for the first time, Snake Eyes unmasked, right? And this is where we get, at least in the comic book, we get an idea of the scarring and injuries that he suffered. But let us focus on one thing. Put the scars away for 1 second and realize that it's clearly a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Anglo-Saxon guy, right? It's a white guy. And this ultimately is what developed a lot of the ire, if you will, when it came to the new Snake Eyes movie. We have Henry Golding in the lead role, portraying Snake Eyes. And, you know, at the end of the day, whether or not it was going to be a different actor or a different ethnicity, I honestly didn't care. My personal opinion was I just want to see a really good G.I. Joe / Snake Eyes movie. And as long as Henry or whoever was going to be cast in this role, I think portrayed it well, I don't think I would have been stuck on the fact that he didn't have blonde hair. And also, we have to think about when the comic was written in the 80s and featuring back to the Vietnam War, right? As opposed to obviously trying to tell a modern day tale, and what the options were there, right? We didn't want Snake Eyes to be 75 years old at this point, having fought in Vietnam. So it needed definitely to be brought, I think, a little more current. So I was okay with that, the idea that obviously it wasn't going to be a straight off the page retelling of the original history and backstory from the comic books. All of that said, let's actually talk about what we did get. And sadly, I am probably one of the majority who was not overly impressed with Snake Eyes. And I'm going to tell you a couple reasons why. Like I said, I'm okay with the idea that it wasn't going to be exactly off the page, right? I thought maybe they could bring it forward, make it something related to fighting in Afghanistan, again, having that war aspect. And ultimately, Snake Eyes, the movie, went in an entirely different direction. Instead of the Snake Eyes has family back home, it opens up. And by the way, right now, spoilers! There's going to be a couple spoiler alerts. I'm going to try not to give too much away, but you can't do credit to why I didn't like the movie or did like the movie if you don't actually point out some of the really clear, distinctive differences or changes that were made to the Snake Eyes canon, if you will, in this movie. So the first thing we find out is, as a young man, he's hiding in the wilderness with his father, and ultimately somebody comes to kill his father, and he escapes. So it immediately becomes a vendetta story. It is a revenge story. We see Snake Eyes then, 20 years later, a young adult fighting for money, going from place to place. He's a drifter. It is an entirely different type of character story than you would have anticipated, or I would have anticipated. And it deviates really 180 degrees from any of the original kind of source material of the 80s. Now, granted, okay, they're going a different realm here. It's more of a revenge, and I'm assuming redemption story. It progresses, and then we get to meet who actually was one of my favorite characters in the movie, which was Tommy. Tommy Storm, of course, who becomes Storm Shadow, played by Andrew Koji. And I thought this particular actor and the performance was actually really good. I liked it. So we get to now follow Snake Eyes as he goes to the Arashikage clan, and there, without giving too much away, there's a lot of double crossing, double crossing, triple double crossing. It's a little bit heavy. Now, I didn't mind the idea that they brought in some other aspects, like they hinted at Cobra, about halfway through the film, and how Cobra is leading like this shadow control over things like the Yakuza and military powers and dictatorships. It's like this, all of these other individual pieces actually really fall under the umbrella of Cobra. That was an interesting concept, right? It's not just its own standalone, hey, we're Cobra, we've got guys with masks and tanks. The idea was it was also had this big shadowy conspiracy going on, and how they've infiltrated all of these other criminal organizations. That was interesting to me. And then, as I was starting to get a little more interested, they introduce the Baroness. And I'm sorry, guys. Yes, I'm a fan of the original Baroness. I don't even mind the Baroness in the first G.I. Joe movie, the way it was portrayed. I did not like this Baroness. You can't really talk about the Baroness without also talking about the other character that they, in my opinion, just shoehorned in, which was Scarlet, right, from G.I. Joe. So it opens up where it says it's a G.I. Joe Origins movie, but warning, really, other than a couple loose references to Cobra and totally shoehorned, could have been anybody type of character, they bring in G.I. Joe. Even trying to tie Snake Eyes' origin back to G.I. Joe as well. that's where they started to really lose me, because at this point, it could have been a decent redemption story. It could have even been a decent somebody finding peace and finding their way through the martial arts and by joining the clan and these aspects. Basically, kind of your, I'm going to call it kung fu theater and redemption type of story. It could have done well, and the fight scenes and several other aspects of it definitely play to that. But then you're really trying to say, now we're going to take this movie on its own, these pieces, which could have been decent, right? And now we're going to say, but we got to make some references to G.I. Joe. They're forgettable, they're loose, and the character of Scarlet is, in my opinion, just annoying. There's nothing, they overdo it so much, almost like pushing it to the extreme with Scarlet, so that her few minutes of screen time really scream at you, G.I. Joe, right? This is a G.I. Joe movie. It's not really a G.I. Joe movie. And then we have the Baroness, who similarly is there, and then just not there, and very easily forgettable. So you really, if you push those now to the side, you push the fact that the references to Joe and Cobra really are pretty loose and really don't progress or support the overarching plot or drive for the Snake Eyes character, or for Tommy, right? His best friend, his only friend. You then get to the core characters, and there's really three core characters. We have Snake Eyes, of course. We have Storm Shadow, of course, or Tommy, as he really is throughout the whole film. And then we have this other character called Akiko, right? Who was a martial arts master, member of they hint at the idea of an outsider, but a member now of the clan, saved by the Arashikage. Those three central characters by themselves, had it literally been called anything but Snake Eyes, would have at least, to me, elevated the movie up from, I'm going to call it a C-rated G.I. Joe attempt, right, to a B-plus level martial arts type of movie. There was some interesting character development, that did start to come to be between Snake Eyes and Tommy's character, right? There's trust issues. There's trust issues within the clan. Tommy's bringing in this outsider. We have this character of Akiko, who is very, very concerned about this outsider coming in, but then starts to understand him. And then ultimately, as a G.I. Joe / Snake Eyes movie, where it lost me, I was pretty much out, was the three challenges. The idea that Snake Eyes had to go through several challenges, and all of a sudden the G.I. Joe movie becomes like swords and sorcery, right? So we have massive snakes. And listen, again, spoilers. Watch the movie. Don't watch the movie. We have this idea that these snakes, these massive boa constrictor snakes, I'm talking big boa constrictor snakes, are going to be able to read into Snake Eyes' true intentions and judge whether he's worthy. We have a magic stone. You heard that correctly. A magic stone that the wielder can use to burn buildings and ignite people or disintegrate things. All of a sudden, it's like a magic Marvel movie. It didn't feel right. It didn't fit. All of a sudden, it's not just a martial arts movie. It's not just a redemption movie. Now we're going to try to fill in this, I'm just going to call weird and odd mystical power and mysticism in it, which, again, even if you don't care about the original origin story from Snake Eyes, follow the content. And I'm not talking the cartoon. I'm talking, follow a lot of the original content. And all of a sudden, the movie really seems to jump the shark, right? With this whole other aspect that they introduce basically 2/3 of the way through the movie. It lost me. It lost me at that point. Had it again been a martial arts type of movie with mysticism, right, kind of mixed in, even from the beginning, then it would have made sense. The plot would have flown and I think worked better together. But it felt to me ultimately like this was three different movies, three completely distinct movies. And sadly, individually, none of them were particularly very good. And together, they're kind of a train wreck. So then we get to the end, which ultimately is what, just like if you watch Smallville, you might have watched for however many years and seasons, because ultimately, what did we want to see? We wanted to see Clark Kent put on the suit, throw on the cape, and actually fly. Just once, we wanted to see Superman. So, of course, you wait through the whole movie, and you want to eventually see Snake Eyes, right? And you want to see Storm Shadow. Well, ultimately, Snake Eyes, we get to see him. At the end, he can still talk. He's going out to look for Tommy. There's been the great breakup, right? That's probably one of the few things that carried over from the original content, is the idea that they came up together as friends, they were members of the clan, and ultimately mistrust, deception, and animosity split a wedge in them, leading Storm Shadow to go to Cobra and Snake Eyes eventually to go to G.I. Joe. That whole item, that interesting aspect of the original story, is all of 3 minutes at the end of the movie. It feels like it's nothing but a setup. And I get it. It's an origins movie. It's meant to introduce characters. It's meant to set up potential future movies. But you really need to actually work on let's get a character that we feel for, we care about, at some degree can relate to. I found myself relating far more to Storm Shadow's character than at all with Snake Eyes. He was forgettable. He was borderline boring. I really found the clan and the various members of the clan to be the most interesting part of the movie. But of course, they're not given nearly as much attention or screen time. It's devoted to Snake Eyes and his backstory and various aspects of what he's doing while he's at the clan. So ultimately, we get to the last few minutes of the movie, and we get to basically see Snake Eyes with his helmet, which he's given, and yet makes no sense why he's given it. There could have been something interesting there, as opposed to just, hey, by the way, here's an outfit and it has a helmet. It's, of course, the iconic, visor style helmet, and it was cool to see for about 2 seconds, but as he then jumps on a motorcycle and drives away, it could have been the end of any other movie. Didn't have to be a Snake Eyes movie. And similarly, the way that they try to build in Storm Shadow is equally kind of just light. There's no real passion there. It's basically just hey, we see you're upset. What about joining Cobra? And he's like, okay. I mean, really, it's just that's the one point where Andrew Koji, almost seemed like he was phoning it in, and I had really enjoyed him through so much of this movie. So what am I getting at? What am I getting here? First of all, if you're a super fan of G.I. Joe and a super fan of Snake Eyes, you probably don't want to watch it, right? Oftentimes you'll hear people say, hey, if you're a fan and you really love the material, then you'll probably be okay with it, or you might like it, or you'll find things. I'm going to tell you, no, walk away, man. Just walk away. It's not the movie for you. If you're not a huge fan, you're just interested in a decent, not great, not horrible, kind of martial arts, and you're pretty much cut and dry type of redemption and training montage story, you might enjoy it. I've seen reviews where people have enjoyed it. Most of them enjoyed it because they just ignored any of the other references to G.I. Joe, Cobra, or this mythos and background that many of us who've grown up with this character or know this character are ultimately going to find really frustrating in this movie. So at the end of the day, it was okay. It was not great. As a fan of G.I. Joe, it was a horrible G.I. Joe movie. Cut and dry. The first G.I. Joe movie, Rise of Cobra, it to me is a more entertaining and interesting, and at least for all of its flaws and potential cheesiness, some of that works if you're a fan of G.I. Joe, when you know that between the comic books being far more serious and the cartoon being a little bit more lighthearted, at least Rise of Cobra tried to find a little bit of balance in there. Not always striking hot, but I can go back and watch that movie and have kind of a stupid grin on my face at how I love certain parts of it and how certain parts are just pure laughable. And that's kind of how G.I. Joe the cartoon was, right? Growing up. This one really fails to be funny, fails to be clever, fails to be cute, and ultimately becomes a out-of-the-box standard action film with really nothing else, in my opinion, going for it. So that's my 2 cents and maybe $2 extra on the Snake Eyes movie. Ultimately, my biggest disappointment is not just that the movie for me, was an especially big letdown. But it did not do well at the box office. Within days of its release, it was available on streaming media. You can see here, if we look at on Plex, it didn't do very well in a lot of the reviews. It's getting some feedback, but most of them are similar to what I felt. And I didn't read any reviews. Of course, I'd heard a lot of the frustration and what everybody was saying prior to the movie come out. There was no way to avoid it unless I didn't want to go to any of my G.I. Joe Facebook groups. But I didn't read any reviews, and I really said I'm going to go into this with an open mind and try to remember that we want to see a resurgence of these types of characters, and that's where I'm disappointed. We didn't get a resurgence or a new, fresh, really interesting approach to this character. It was a generic movie, and ultimately that's what I think got represented by the reviews and the box office. So the disappointment is, for me, and I'm sure a lot of other G.I. Joe fans, is we want to see a good G.I. Joe movie. There's a lot of great source material out there. Whether you go a little campier with the G.I. Joe cartoon or you go more serious with the G.I. Joe comic books, there's wealth of material. How do we know this? Because this is where Marvel has been extremely successful. While they might change certain aspects, ultimately, when you watch the Marvel movies and the various characters, they are grounded in decades of source material. The stories that absolutely worked from a comic book perspective are adjusted and written for a cinematic approach, but ultimately keep the heart and soul of that source material. And that is ultimately where Snake Eyes is a letdown. There's no heart and there's no soul. There's nothing really in this movie other than the name Snake Eyes that harkens back to what some of those great source material items were that I think could have really moved this movie up considerably, not just for the long-term fans, but for people just interested in something old but new again is the only way I can describe it. Taking great source material and updating it and making it accessible to a more modern audience. Snake Eyes didn't do that, which means I think it'll be a while before we see any more G.I. Joe movies. So for being an origin story, this might also be the closing chapter of G.I. Joe, at least for some time. But we'll keep our fingers crossed and hopefully we'll get something in the future that is worthy. If in the meantime, if nothing else, I am super duper psyched about what I think is going to be everything I just told you I wanted out of Snake Eyes, but in a different movie, and that is the upcoming Dune release. I'm extremely excited to see this new updated take from Denis Villeneuve on the new Dune series, coming out in October 20th, if I'm correct. So, yes, I was disappointed with Snake Eyes. Maybe it'll make me appreciate Dune all the much more, but we'll have to wait and see. And I'm sure, as a lifelong Dune fan, that shortly after Dune comes out, I'll be right back here telling you exactly what I thought of it. Until then, I'm Dave Floss with Prometheus Falling Toys and Mentally Unbalanced. Let us know what you think. First of all, if you liked the video, go ahead and click like. Do us another big favor. Subscribe to our videos. Have an opinion? Agree with me? Disagree with me? As long as you keep it civil, go ahead and add some comments. Until then, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.